I walked into my mother's house at 6:30 on a Sunday night. First time in 8 months. No one looked up for 7 seconds. My brother Daniel was at the head of the table. My mother was serving him first. My father was asking about his job. The conversation had a shape, a rhythm, and I wasn't in it. I hadn't been in it for 8 months. No one had called to ask why. My mother saw me. She said, "Oh, you came?" Then she turned to Daniel and asked if he wanted more potatoes. I sat down, ate the meal Daniel likes, listened to the stories about Daniel's childhood, watched my father laugh at Daniel's jokes the way he never laughed at mine. And I realized I had been gone for 8 months. Nothing was different. Nothing was missing. Then my mother looked at me, really looked, for the first time since I walked in. She said, "What's wrong with you? You've been quiet all night. Not, are you okay? Not, we missed you. What's wrong with you?" That's when I understood. They hadn't noticed I was gone. They noticed I wasn't performing. And that was worse. My name is Paul. I was 37 then, the younger of two sons, the one who helped in the kitchen while my brother watched football in the living room. That Christmas 2 years before the silence, I was standing in my mother's sink washing lettuce when she asked me to bring Daniel a drink. He was in the other room, 10 feet away. I said, "He has legs." She said, "Don't be difficult." I dried my hands and brought him the drink. He didn't say thank you, didn't look up. The game was on. I stood there for a second holding the glass while he reached for it without making eye contact. Then I went back to the kitchen. I wasn't angry. I was just tired in a way that didn't have a name yet. My birthday came a few months later. My mother called me at 9 p.m. 9 o'clock. She said, "I'm so sorry. I was helping Daniel with something and lost track of time." She didn't say what she was helping him with. I didn't ask. I said, "It's fine." She said, "You're so understanding." That wasn't a compliment. That was an assessment of my function. I hung up and sat in my living room and wondered why being understanding felt exactly like being invisible. Another Sunday dinner. Daniel was late. We waited 45 minutes. No one called him. My mother kept checking the window, but she never picked up her phone. When he finally walked in, she said, "Traffic?" He said, "Busy." She nodded. Dinner started. If I was late, she called. She asked where I was. She said, "We waited." I had never said that out loud. I didn't need to. Everyone knew. That was the thing about my family. Nothing needed to be said. The silence did all the work. After dinner, my father pulled me aside. He was quiet, tired in his own way. We stood in the garage while he looked for something in a drawer he wasn't really searching through. He said, "You don't have to come to every one of these." I said, "What?" He said, "Dinner. Sundays. You don't have to come." I said, "She'll notice." He looked at me. Then he said, "Will she?" And he walked away. I stood there in the garage with the door half open and the cold air coming in. I remembered that conversation for 2 years before I did anything about it. I told myself he was wrong, that she would notice, that she would care, that I mattered differently than the way I was treated. I told myself that for 2 years. Then I stopped. Daniel announced he was thinking about buying a house. Just thinking about it. No offer accepted. No mortgage approved. Just the idea. My mother spent 3 weeks talking about it. She researched neighborhoods online. She called realtors she knew from church. She sent him listings every morning before work. When I bought my house 2 years ago, she said, "That's nice," and asked what was for dinner. I spent 6 months saving for the down payment. I painted every room myself. She came over once, walked through the living room, said the ceilings were low. Then she left. A Sunday dinner. 6 people at the table. My mother asked Daniel about his job, about his girlfriend, about his plans for the summer. Then she looked at me. She said, "Are you still at the same company?" I said yes. She nodded. That was the whole conversation about my life. Aunt Patricia caught my eye across the table. She looked away first. After dinner, I walked Patricia to her car. The driveway was cold. She stood with her hand on the door handle and said, "You're too quiet at those dinners." I said, "No one asked me anything." She said, "You could volunteer." I said, "Why?" "So they can listen to Daniel." She was quiet for a long time. The wind came through the trees. She said, "Your mother doesn't see what she's doing." I said, "She sees. She just doesn't think it matters." Patricia didn't argue. That was how I knew I was right. When someone who loves you doesn't fight your assessment of the situation, it means they've already made peace with the same truth. My father called me on a Tuesday night, not about anything important, just to talk. We talked about the weather, about the garden he was planning for spring, about a book he was reading. Then he said, "I miss you at dinners." I said, "I'm at every dinner." He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "I know. I miss you when you're sitting right there." I didn't know what to say to that. He said, "Just keep showing up. For me, not for her." I said, "Okay." But I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Being invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to love you is a particular kind of exhaustion. The kind that doesn't go away with sleep. The kind that sits in your chest and waits. I had been carrying it for years. My father knew. He had been carrying something too. But he couldn't carry mine. He could only ask me to stay. And I was running out of reasons to say yes. The last Sunday dinner before the 8 months started the way all of them started. Daniel was telling a story about a work conflict. Someone had wronged him. Someone had underestimated him. My mother was rapt, leaning forward, asking follow-up questions, laughing at his jokes like they were the funniest things she had ever heard. I was eating a meal I didn't remember tasting. The chicken was dry. The potatoes were cold. Or maybe they weren't. I couldn't tell anymore. My father was silent. Patricia was watching me from across the table. Daniel finished his story. Everyone laughed. Then my mother turned to me. She said, "You're quiet tonight." I said, "I'm always quiet." She said, "Well, you could participate." Daniel laughed. Not unkindly, just reflexively. The way you laugh when your mother makes a comment about your brother and you don't want to think too hard about what it means. I put my fork down. I said, "Participate in what?" The conversation about Daniel's life? The meal Daniel likes? The stories Daniel tells? My mother's face closed. That particular expression she had, the one that said I was being difficult, that I was ruining something, that I should know better by now. She said, "I don't know why you have to make everything so difficult." I said, "I'm not making anything difficult. I'm just noticing." Daniel said, "Noticing what?" I looked at him. And my mother, and my father who wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at his plate, cutting a piece of chicken into smaller and smaller pieces. I said nothing. Forget it. I finished my dinner in silence. That was the last time I ate at that table for 8 months. In the car, Patricia texted me, "Don't give up on them." I wrote back, "I'm not giving up. I'm just stopping for a while." She wrote, "They won't notice." I wrote, "I know." And I did know. That was the whole point. That was what I was about to have proved. Not that they didn't love me. They did, in their way. But love and attention are not the same thing. You can love someone and still not see them. You can love someone and still build the entire table around someone else's hunger. I had been sitting at that table for 37 years, watching my mother serve my brother first, watching my father stay silent, watching Patricia watch me with eyes that said, "I see you, but I can't save you." I was tired, not angry, not sad, just tired, and I decided to stop showing up. Not forever, just long enough to see what happened. What would shift? What would break? What would finally get seen? I didn't know yet that the answer was nothing. Nothing would shift. Nothing would break. Nothing would get seen. That was the lesson. And I had to be gone for 8 months to learn it. The first Sunday I skipped, I didn't tell anyone. No text. No call. I just didn't go. At 6:30 p.m., I sat on my couch. The time dinner would start. I'd turn on a movie. Something action. Something loud. Something that would fill the space where the sound of my mother's kitchen used to be. At 8 p.m., I looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. No one had asked where I was. Monday morning, my father called. He said, "You weren't at dinner." I said no. He said, "Are you okay?" I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your mother didn't mention it." I said, "I know." Another pause. Longer this time. Then he said, "I noticed." I said, "I know that too." That was the whole conversation. We hung up. I sat at my desk and wondered why that small acknowledgement made me feel worse than silence. Month 2. Thanksgiving. I didn't go. I told myself I would. Made a plan to show up, eat quickly, leave early. Then I didn't. I stayed home. At 4 p.m., I opened my phone. My mother had posted photos online. Daniel was carving the turkey. My father was at the end of the table. There was an empty chair next to him. My mother had written, "So thankful for my family." No one commented on the empty chair. I stared at the photo for 20 minutes. Zoomed in on my father's face. He wasn't smiling, but he wasn't frowning either. He just looked tired. The same tired I felt. I closed the app. I didn't eat turkey that day. I ordered pizza. It was fine. The pizza didn't ask where I'd been. That night, Patricia called me. It was late. Almost 10. She said, "Your mother asked about you." I said she did. Patricia said, "She said Paul couldn't make it. Like you had the flu. Like you wanted to be there, and something stopped you." I said he chose not to come. I held my breath. Patricia said she changed the subject. I said, "Thank you for saying it." Patricia said it didn't change anything. I said, "I know, but someone said it. That's not nothing." I hung up and sat in the dark. The pizza box was on a coffee table. Half eaten, cold. I thought about my mother changing the subject. About my father noticing my absence, but not naming it to anyone else. About Daniel carving the turkey in the photos, probably not even aware that I wasn't there. I had been gone for 2 months. 2 months of Sundays and phone calls and holiday. And the only person who had said my name out loud was my aunt, in a conversation my mother immediately ended. I wasn't angry. I was just watching, waiting to see if anyone would say my name when I wasn't in the room to hear it. 2 months in, the answer was clear. No one was saying it. No one was asking. No one was waiting. I was the one who had always done the waiting. And I had finally stopped. That was the part that hurt. Not that they didn't notice. That I had expected them to. After 37 years, I still expected them to. And I was wrong. Month 3. My birthday. My mother texted at 4 p.m. "Happy birthday." Not, "I love you." Not, "I miss you." Just happy birthday. Like she was checking a box. Like someone had reminded her and she was getting it done before she forgot again. I texted back, "Thanks." She didn't respond. That was the whole exchange. My father called later. He sang. Off key. Terrible. He had always sung off key. My whole life. I cried after I hung up. Not because I was sad. Because he remembered. Because he was the only one. Month 5. Christmas. I didn't go. I told my father I was sick. He knew I wasn't sick. He had known for months. He said, "I'll save you a plate." I said, "Don't." He said, "I'm going to anyway." He did. He brought it to my apartment the next day. Cold turkey. Cold potatoes. Cold gravy in a plastic container. He sat on my couch and ate with me. He didn't say, "Come back." He didn't say, "She misses you." He just ate cold Christmas dinner with his son who couldn't face a room where he didn't exist. I said, "You don't have to do this." He said, "I know." I said, "Then why are you here?" He looked at me. The same tired eyes I'd seen my whole life. He said, "Because you're my son, and I've spent 39 years watching you disappear at that table. I'm not going to watch you disappear alone." I said, "You could have said something before." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I know. I'm saying it now. I'm slow. I didn't forgive him. Not yet. But I stopped being angry at him for one night. That was something." Month 6. Patricia called. She said, "Your mother hosted Easter. Daniel brought his girlfriend. Your father sat in the corner. There was an empty chair." I said, "Did anyone mention it?" She said, "Your mother said more room for the rest of us." I said, "She said that out loud?" Patricia said, "Yes." And no one said anything. Not even your father. I sat with that for a minute. Then I said, "He brought me Christmas dinner, but he didn't defend me at Easter." Patricia said, "He's complicated." I said, "No, he's just scared. There's a difference." That was when I realized something. Sitting in my apartment in month 6. My father saw me. He always had. But seeing wasn't acting. He had watched me disappear for years. Watched my mother serve Daniel first. Watched the table get built around someone else's hunger. And the most he had ever done was pull me aside in the garage and say, "You don't have to come to every one of these." Not, "I'll talk to her." Not, "This isn't right." Just, "You don't have to come." He gave me permission to leave instead of giving me a reason to stay. I wasn't sure which one was worse. Permission to leave meant he had already given up on the table changing. Permission to leave meant he had made peace with my absence before I had. I loved him, but love that won't fight for you is just witness without risk. And I had spent enough time being witnessed. I needed someone to risk something. No one was. So I stayed away. That was month 6. 2 more to go. Month 7. My phone rang. Daniel. I almost didn't answer, but I did. He said, "Hey." I said, "Hey." Long pause. The kind of pause that sits in the space between people who haven't spoken in months and don't know how to start. He said, "You haven't been around." I said, "No." He said, "Is everything okay?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You sure?" I said, "Yes." Another pause. He said, "Mom mentioned it." I said, "Mentioned what?" He said that you're not coming to dinner. I held the phone tighter. I said, "What did she say exactly?" He said, "She said, I don't know what's wrong with him." I closed my eyes. I said, "She didn't ask what's wrong with me. She said, what's wrong with him? Like I'm broken." Daniel said, "That's not what she meant." I said, "Then what did she mean?" He was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know. I just thought I should call." I said, "You should have called 6 months ago." He said, "I didn't think about it." I said, "I know. That's the problem. You've never had to think about me. Because the table has always been yours. The food has always been yours. The attention has always been yours. Why would you think about the person sitting in the chair that doesn't have a name?" He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just said, "Okay," and hung up. Patricia called me after. She said, "Daniel called me. He said you were cold." I said I wasn't cold. I was honest. She said, "He doesn't know the difference." I said, "No, he doesn't. Because no one has ever been cold to him. No one has had to be." Patricia was quiet. Then she said, "That's true." And she hung up. My father called at 9 p.m. His voice was low, tired. He said, "I'm not going to ask you to come back. But I want you to know, I see why you left. I've always seen it. I just didn't know what to do about it." I said, "You could have said something. To her. To him. To anyone." He said, "I know. I'm saying it now." I said, "It's been 7 months." He said, "I know. I'm slow." I said, "Slow isn't the same as brave." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No, it's not." He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just sat on the phone with me in silence. I could hear him breathing, could hear the clock in his kitchen ticking, could hear the weight of 39 years of not saying anything pressing down on the line between us. And I realized something. This was all he knew how to give. Silence that wasn't alone. Silence that said, "I'm here, even though I don't know how to help." It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. But it wasn't nothing. And I had spent 7 months learning the difference between nothing and something that just wasn't enough. My father was the latter. My mother was the former. Daniel hadn't even entered the equation. He had called once, said the wrong thing, hung up, and probably hadn't thought about me since. Love that arrives too late. Is it still love? Or is it just a memory of what it should have been? I didn't know. I was still trying to figure out the difference between being seen and being saved. My father saw me. He just couldn't save me. And maybe that was the whole truth of my family. Not malice, not cruelty, just a room full of people who couldn't look up from their own plates long enough to notice someone was eating alone. My mother sent an invitation, printed, in the mail, an envelope with my name on it. Inside, a card that said, "Family dinner, Sunday at 6. Please RSVP." Not a group text, not a casual mention in a phone call. An invitation. My name was on the envelope. Not the family. Not everyone. My name. I RSVP'd yes. Not because I wanted to go. Because I needed to see if anything had changed. Sunday, 6:30 p.m. I walked in. The hook happened exactly as I had imagined it. No one looked up for 7 seconds. My mother was in the kitchen. Daniel was at the head of the table. My father was reading something on his phone. Patricia was pouring water into glasses. I stood in the doorway with my coat still on and watched them. 7 seconds. Then my mother looked up. She said, "Oh, you came." Not, "We missed you." Not, "Where have you been?" Just, "Oh, you came." Like I was a package she had forgotten she ordered. She was already turning back to the stove before I'd taken off my coat. I sat down. My plate had the meal Daniel likes. Pot roast. His favorite. The conversation was about his promotion. the details of his new office, the challenges of managing younger staff. The stories were about his childhood, the time he scored the winning goal, the time he got into college, the time he bought his first car. My life did not come up. My 8 months of absence did not come up. I had been gone for 240 days, and nothing was different. I said no one asked where I was. My mother looked at me. She said, "We figured you were busy." I said, "For 8 months." She shrugged. "You have your own life." I said, "Daniel has his own life too. But you know every detail of his." My mother's face hardened. That particular expression she had worn my whole life. The one that said I was being difficult. The one that said I was ruining something. She said, "This is why you don't come. You're so negative." I said, "I'm not negative. I'm accurate. There's a difference." Daniel said, "Can we not do this?" My father was staring at his plate, cutting something into smaller and smaller pieces. Patricia was watching me. I took a breath. I said, "No, we can't do this, because this is the only thing we ever do. Talk about Daniel. Eat Daniel's food. Sit in Daniel's shadow." I stopped coming because I was tired of being invisible in plain sight. And I came back tonight to see if anyone noticed I was gone. I looked around the table. No one did. I stood up. I didn't leave yet. I just stood. My mother said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm not going anywhere. I'm just not sitting down again until someone asks me a question about my life." The room was silent. The clock on the wall ticked. My father looked up. He said, "How's work?" The question was small, late, pathetic, even given everything. But it was a question. I sat down. I answered. I talked about my job, about a project I was leading, about a colleague who had annoyed me. My father nodded. Patricia asked one follow-up. My mother didn't ask anything. She served more pot roast to Daniel. Daniel looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. The dinner continued. When I left, no one said, "Come back soon." They said, "Drive safe." That was different. That wasn't an invitation. That was a wish for my survival, not my presence. I walked to my car in the dark. The air was cold. The sky was clear. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute before starting the engine. One question. One small question from one person. Was that enough to fill 8 months of silence? Or did it just make the silence louder by contrast? I didn't know. I was still trying to figure out if being seen by one person was better than being invisible to everyone. My father saw me. He always had. But seeing wasn't saving. And I wasn't sure anymore if I needed saving. Maybe I just needed someone to sit across from me and eat cold Christmas dinner and say, "How's work?" Maybe that was the whole of it. Not a grand reconciliation. Not an apology from my mother. Just one person who finally asked. Late. Small. But there. The next Sunday, I didn't go. My mother didn't text. My father called. He said, "She noticed you weren't there." I said, "Did she ask why?" He was quiet for a second. Then he said no. She just said, "He's not coming anymore." I said, "That's not noticing. That's observing." He said, "It's the same thing to her." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said nothing. We sat on the phone in silence until he said, "I'll talk to you later," and hung up. Patricia came over that week. She brought wine. We sat on my couch with the bottle between us and the rain hitting the window. She said, "I've been thinking about what you said at dinner, about being invisible in plain sight." I said, "It's not a revelation. It's just a fact." She looked at me. She said, "Facts can be revelations if you've been pretending not to see them." I poured more wine. She said, "Your mother won't change. You know that, right?" I said, "I know." She said, "Then what are you hoping for?" I thought about it. Really thought. Not about what I wanted my mother to do. She was never going to do it. Not about Daniel. He was never going to see it. About me. What I was hoping for myself. I said, "I'm not hoping for her to change. I'm hoping to stop needing her to." Patricia said, "That's different." I said, "I know. That's why it took 8 months." She said, "And your father?" I was quiet for a long time. The rain got harder. I said, "I don't know. I'm angrier at him than I am at her." She never pretended to see me. He did. And he still didn't do anything. Patricia said, "He brought you Christmas dinner." I said, "That's not the same as standing up at Easter when she said more room for the rest of us." Patricia said, "No, it's not." I said, "So where does that leave me?" Patricia set her glass down. She said, "That leaves you deciding whether his love is worth the cost of his silence." I didn't have an answer. Not yet. Maybe not ever. That night, I blocked my mother on social media. Not to punish her. To stop checking. To stop waiting. To stop wondering if she had posted a photo with an empty chair or a caption about family that didn't include me. I didn't need evidence anymore. I had 8 months of silence. That was the evidence. That was the whole case. But I didn't block my father. I couldn't, because he was the one who sang off key on my birthday and brought cold turkey to my apartment and asked how's work when no one else would. It wasn't enough. It had never been enough. But it was the only thing I had. And I was tired of throwing away the only things I had just because they weren't everything. I sat in my living room after Patricia left. The wine bottle was empty. The rain had stopped. I thought about what she had asked me, whether his love was worth the cost of his silence. I didn't know. I didn't know if love that wouldn't fight for you was still love. I didn't know if silence that wasn't alone was enough to build anything on. I didn't know if I was asking for too much or if they had just trained me to ask for too little. But I knew one thing. I had stopped needing my mother to see me. That was different. That was 8 months of work. And I wasn't going to undo it just because she sent a printed invitation. One dinner didn't fix anything, but show me something. I could sit at that table and not disappear. Not because they saw me, because I refused to be invisible anymore. That was mine. No one could take that. Not my mother. Not Daniel. Not even my father with his late questions and his cold turkey and his silence that wasn't alone. I was visible to myself. That was the only visibility that mattered in the end. I just wished it had been enough to be seen by someone else. 1 year after the first skip dinner, I went to Christmas. Not for my mother. For my father. He was sitting in his usual chair. The one at the end of the table that had never been questioned. Not by anyone. Not by him. I sat next to him. Not at the table. Next to him. On the arm of the couch. He looked at me. Then he put his hand on my arm for 1 second. That was the whole gift. I didn't pull away, but I didn't lean in either. I just sat there and let his hand rest on my sleeve and watched my mother serve Daniel's favorite meal to Daniel's favorite audience. My mother served dinner. Pot roast again. Daniel's favorite. The conversation was about Daniel's year. His promotion. His vacation. His girlfriend. No one asked about mine. I didn't offer. My father asked me one question. Quiet. So only I could hear. He said, "You okay?" I said yes. He nodded. Then I said, "Are you?" He looked at me. Really looked. Not the quick glance he usually gave. A long one. He said, "I'm tired." I said, "Me too." That wasn't forgiveness. That wasn't resolution. That was just two tired men acknowledging that they had both failed each other in different ways. He failed by watching. I failed by expecting him to be someone he had never been. Someone who stood up. Someone who spoke. Someone who said, "This isn't right," to the woman he had spent 40 years learning not to confront. I left at 8 p.m. Before dessert. My mother said, "You're leaving early?" I said yes. She didn't ask why. Daniel didn't look up. He was telling another story. Patricia hugged me in the driveway. The cold air smelled like wood smoke. She said, "You came." I said, "I came for him." She said, "He knows." I drove home. The house was dark. I turned on the lights. I made myself dinner. The meal I liked. Chicken. Rice. Vegetables roasted the way I had learned to make them during the 8 months when I wasn't eating pot roast at my mother's table. I ate at my own table. No one asked about my day, but no one interrupted either. That was the difference between being alone and being invisible. Alone was quiet. Invisible was quiet with witnesses. I chose alone. At least I knew where I was. My father called me on New Year's Day. His voice was low, the same voice he had used my whole life. The one that said, "I'm here, but I don't know how to help." He said, "I'm not going to miss your birthday this year. I'll be there, even if no one else is." I said, "Okay." He said, "That's not a promise I can keep. It's just a plan." I said, "Okay." He said, "I love you." I said, "I know." I didn't say it back. Not because I didn't love him. Because I wasn't sure love was enough anymore. I needed someone to act, and he had never been good at that. But he was showing up to my birthday. That was an action. It was small. It was late. But it was something, and maybe that was what the 8 months taught me. Not that I deserved more, but that I was allowed to ask for it, even from a man who had only ever known how to sit in silence, even from a mother who would never see the empty chair, even from myself, the version of me who had spent 39 years believing that if I just stayed quiet enough, someone would finally ask me a question. No one did, so I stopped showing up. And in that stopping, I finally started. That's the story. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just 8 months of absence that taught me exactly who those dinners were for. And one cold Christmas with a father who was trying, badly, to love me in the only way he knew how. It wasn't enough, but it wasn't nothing. And for now, that was where I landed. I'm over at where silence ends. When did you stop showing up and realize no one was waiting for you to come back?